Hello and welcome to this demo on how to get started with our lab cloud. So you will administer most of it from a web browser. It works good with Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Internet Explorer. The experience can be somewhat not that good. So on the computers running in the computer hall, you have Windows 7. So this demo will be recorded in Windows 7, but you can use your own computer to configure your machines. The first thing we need to do is to access the account, and you do that from the course homepage. And you probably won't be logged in, but I am now. So you have a link up here that says Lab Cloud. I don't have that now because I haven't published it. And you have to be logged in, otherwise you won't see your personal information here. This video will also be in this page under setting up the lab environment. And you have your username, your password, and something called key pairs. We will come to that later on. But to log in, you just enter this page. So it's labcloudftk.lnu.se. And the first thing that you see, this overview page, you have these tabs, which you should not have actually. Some bug in the system that makes you see this, but you can't do anything in the administration. So if you go to network here, you will get an error or logged out even. If you get logged out, you can see up here in the URL, it will try to access this path again, and you don't have access to it. So even if you try to log in, you will probably just get logged out again. Yeah. So if this happens, you have to see at the URL. You shouldn't have that page as the next page. So just go to the login page. And then you should be fine. So you shouldn't use the two panes, admin and identity. All your configuration will be done from, most of them will be from this compute part. Here you can see that you can have 15 machines. This is instances. We have 0 now, and how many CPUs you can have, and the amount of RAM, the floating IPs, I'll come to that later on, something called security groups, which you already have 3, volumes and volume storage. Now, I have already set up the network part for you because this isn't the course in networks. But we can see what I have set up. If we go to graph and toggle these. And the naming will be your username, and then I have called them. Let's see, so we can see them here. So we have this router, and the router is connected to something called Internet LAN. That will make it so that our other networks will be able to access the internet. So we have 2 other LANs. One is called DMC and one is called LAN. The local area network is where you have computers that are in your company in the local area network. And in the DMC, it's called demilitarized zone, we will have publicly accessed servers like web servers and DNS servers and stuff like that. But in the first lab, we will only have machines in the LAN. So that is the network that is set up. Computers in the LAN can only access computers in the LAN. and computers in the DMC can only access computers in DMC, and of course they can come out through the internet. So the next thing that we need is, or you can do, is try and start up a machine. And we do that under instances. So here on the instance, we don't have any. So we click launch instance. We will give it a name. We can create, let's say, just a Windows server. And then we have something called availability zones. And we have named this so it should be easy. If you're creating a Windows machine, you should put it in Windows computers. If you are creating a Linux machine, you should put it in Linux computers. And this is just how we manage our resources on the server side, on the cloud side. So if you put a Windows machine in the Linux computers, it will work. But just stick with this plan. So Windows machines in Windows computers and Linux machines in Linux computers. And this is the amount if you want to create multiple instances of this. For now, we will just create the one. And then we have the source. From, as I said in the introduction lecture, you don't install the operating system. It's already installed. You are starting up the machine from an image. So you don't see an installation process here. You should have seen that when you did the first part of the lab one, when you're using VirtualBox instead. So we don't have any volume. There's a different types that you can use, but in this course we will only use image. So we have predefined images, 4 of them. The important part here is that you shouldn't create a volume. You should check this no here after this image. And this you have to do every time you're starting up a new machine. So select image as a boot source and no volume. If you still would have this, then you will probably get an error. The machine won't be able to start. So no new volume. And then what machine do you want? We have an Ubuntu server. This is a Linux machine. And then we have two different Windows Server 2012. One with the graphical interface and one with just the core. And it will be specified in the lab which one you should choose. We can choose the one with the core for now, with the GUI. So then we hit next. Then we have different flavors of machine. How much RAM, how much disk, and the CPUs should the machine have. And as you see, you get a little warning for the flavors that don't support the image that we have chosen. So we've chosen a Windows Server 2012 with the GUI. And as you see, it needs more than 512 megabytes of RAM. It needs at least 1 gig. And the disk has to be at least 20 gig. So the first available flavor that we have is this one. You should not crank it up and take the biggest and fattest machine, because then you will get out of resources. You have a quota on how much resources you can use. Probably this will be specified in the lab tutorial also, which you should choose. But if not specified, you should go with the lowest one that are supported, of course. And then we have the network. And this machine should be in the local area network, so we choose the LAN. The ports will be created automatically, so you don't have to do that. The important part here, when we come to security groups, this is, you can say that OpenStack or the Lab Cloud has a built-in firewall, And for the machines to be able to access different networks, we have to set up rules for that. But we have pre-created for the LAN and the DMC. So if this is a LAN machine, which it is, you should add that security group. We have this default security group, which you don't have to bother. It's always there and should be. Um, the next part is about key pair, and this will only be used when we use Linux computers. So I will come to that when we talk about the Linux computers. After that, the rest of the configuration is the standard settings, so you don't have to do anything more. Just hit launch instance. Now, the Windows machine takes a bit of time to start up because they use more resources. So they can take around 4 to 6 minutes to start. We can, in the meantime, create a Linux machine, so we see how that looks like. So we launch another instance. And we should put that in the Linux computers. And we should choose the image and no volume here also. And as you can see here about the size of the machine, this is the image size. You see that the Linux machines are quite a bit smaller. So that's why it takes much less time to boot up. And you should, let's see, okay. This should be able to run on a quite small machine. So we can choose this one. And the network, we can put that in the LAN also. And the security code should be the LAN. And when this machine is created, you won't have a password for the machine. It will use a key pair instead to authenticate. And we have pre-created a key pair. And that what this file is for. That's under the lab cloud. Let's see if that loads again. So here we have some files that we will be using for authenticating with the machine. So you don't have to do anything here. You shouldn't create a new key pair. We already created that for you. And no more configuration is needed for this machine to start up. I seem to have missed the source. Okay, I didn't choose the source. Should be Linux, and then we probably get an error on that machine. We should use this. We need at least 5 gig of root hard disk. Now we can launch it. The next thing is how do we administer these machines? How do we access the console? How do we log in and how do we configure them? Since we don't have VirtualBox here, so we can't just open up the machine. We have a console. The problem with the console in the web-based version is that it has some bugs. The mouse isn't following along, and the keyboard is not that good. So we need some way to access these machines when we are going to configure them. And for that, we are going to use one machine that we will access from outside the network. And from that machine, we can then access the internal machines. So we can call this some sort of administrator machine. I will start a new instance because we will use a Windows 10 as an operating system for that administrator machine. And that's because we need a Windows machine to be able to access both Linux machines and Windows machines. So we can call this admin client. and we will use the Windows computers and Windows 10, and we should have no volume, otherwise we'll get an error. And we need at least 1 gig of RAM and 20 gigs of hard disk. Network, and we can choose LAN for now, and security group should be LAN also. And then we launch that. It will take around 6 minutes or so. We can look at the console in the web GUI. These two have now launched. We can look at the Linux server demo. If we click on this link and then go to the console, we can see this, and we have a login page. But since we don't have any password for this machine, we can't log in. We need to have these key files, so you won't be able to connect to this machine from this console. In the Windows machines, we actually need to use the console to create an administrator account. This Windows server is now done, so we can access that hopefully from the console. And yes, here you see when you start up, the first thing that you need to do is create a password for the administrator. As you see, I have two mouse cursors here, and they don't follow along. It's hard to know which one is the correct one, and sometimes it's hard to even get to some parts of the dialogue. And then we need to choose a password. And here we don't know what keyboard layout we have. So you shouldn't choose special characters for now, because then it probably won't work when you try to log in. So choose a password, but don't use any special characters or the Swedish special characters. I use this one for now, password 123 dot. Oh, I wasn't consistent. So we see that it is connected to a network. It will get an IP address from OpenStack, since we are in the LAN network. And you could administer the machines from here, but it's quite hard since the cursor and the keyboard isn't working that well. But this machine is now running, and we can see that it has gotten an IP address. Yes, the 192.168.2053. And if we go to instances, we can see it's this IP address. This won't be able to be accessed from the internet, of course. These are local private IP addresses. So the admin machine looks like it's all running, and we can see if we can access that console, so we can set up a password for it. We need to run through this startup wizard. You should choose the Swedish. Let's go back and see. Oh, I can't go back. Okay. You should choose the Swedish keyboard layout if you have a Swedish keyboard, even if you're not speaking Swedish, because then we get the correct keyboard settings that we need to use. And on this machine, it's really important that we choose a hard and good password, because we will be able to access this from the internet. And I will bet you that the hackers will try to access these machines. The IP addresses that we use for this have been around for a while and are usually tried to be hacked when we open up ports for the remote access. So choose a password, the hard password. And what does that mean? You should have big and small letters. You should have some sort of special character, and yeah, it should be quite long. We then need to create the administrator account. So we choose this one, set up a local account. And then we use a name, and you can choose any name here. I would prefer if you don't use admin or administrator, because when the hackers are trying to randomly hack the computer, they will probably use one of those accounts. So choose your own name or something like that. And then we have the password, and this should be a secure password, a good, strong password. You can see here that the keyboard layout is Swedish, and you can check that you can use all the characters in this area up here, because you won't be able to see it. As you see here, it doesn't work great for me. I'm pressing the Swedish character O, but instead I get this dot 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 dot. So try your password out in this window where you can see it before you type it, so you get the correct password. And you need a hint. Sometimes it's hard to get to the places we want, but just flick the cursor around and sometimes it magically works. This setup process takes a couple of minutes. Actually, we can have this work in the background, because now we have the account and the password. So how do we now access it from the outside? Well, we need an IP address for this machine that is publicly accessed. And you then have to create something called a floating IP. We have a lot of public IPs, public IP addresses, that you have 5 each. But you will use some of these for the servers that we want to be able to access from outside the network. Let's see how the browser is going. Seems to be hang. Try to close that one. So we can go to access and security. And here we have a couple of tabs. The security groups are the firewall, you can say. And so to be able to access this machine, you have to open up some ports. So we can create a new security group for remote desk. And I have created some of these in forehand that you should use, but this one you have to create your own. And we then have to manage rules. And as you can see, this security group allows outgoing traffic. So egress is outgoing. So from machines that are in this security group, they can access all IP protocols on all ranges to any network. But we want some traffic to be able to come into this network for these machines. So we add a rule, and the protocol that we will use to access the Windows machine are called RDP, or Remote Desktop. And I don't think that they have the predefined for this. Yes, they have RDP, so we can use that rule, and it will be accessed from anywhere. You are now having a course in networks and computer networks, how they work. And there you will talk a lot about, hopefully, about TCP and UDP and ports and stuff like that. I will try to not take up that much time in this course for it. I will just show you how to set it up. So we add RDP for incoming and IPv4. We won't use IPv6 in this lab cloud. So this is allowed in this group. We also need an IP address, as I said, and that we can get by accessing access and security, and then go to floating IP, and then allocate an IP for this project. And as you can see, we have 0 now, but we have 5 available. And this should come from the pool Internet LAN. So we allocate one, and this will just allocate to the project. It's not connected to any machine. So that's what we have to do next. So we got this address now. We then go to the instances, and we can then have this admin client and assign floating IP. We then choose what IP we want to use. This was the public IP, the floating IP, and to what machine we want to add that, the admin machine. So then these two addresses will be connected to each other. This will be able to be accessed from the outside, and when traffic comes to this IP, it will forward it to this internal IP. We also need to add the security group, edit security groups for this machine, so that we allow this remote desktop traffic. Then I think on the client it's not enabled by default so that you can use RDP. So you have to do that also in this console for the machine. Let's see. We want to get to the window button here and then type remote desktop. And then you can select users who can use remote desktop. We just want to go to the settings for this so that we can enable it. And as we see here, remote desktop is not allowed for this computer, so we have to enable that. And then click apply. Now we should be able to access this. So let's minimize the browser. And in the machine that you are on, you should have a remote desktop client. So you can just type remote and then it will. You can choose a remote desktop client from Linux or from Apple OS 10. And then you just type in the IP address of the machine, and that is the one that we set for this floating IP. So it's this IP. So you can copy that, and then you click connect, and then you will sign in with your credentials. My name was Jakob Admin, I believe. And you will get this warning about the certificate. I won't go through what that is, just allow that. And now we are connecting to the machine, and we get a much easier way to administer the machine. Now you can contact this machine from anywhere in the world, or you can use your own computer or the computer in the computer hall. All you need is a remote desktop client. And here we don't have any problem with the mouse and the keyboard. So I will actually not use, because I'm running this Windows machine as a virtual client. If you want to disconnect, if you go up to the top here, you will get this bar, and then you can just hit close there, and then you will return to the machine that you are on. If you are using another remote desktop client, you can see here I have one, and that's for OS 10 on Mac OS. You just hit the plus sign and then add in a name for the machine. That could be anything. And then the address to connect to it. So it's that one. And then we have the credentials. And I will have a resolution. No, like that. This is just settings for making the recording easier. You can use full screen if you want to. So then you just double click that and accept the certificates. And then we are connected again to the admin machine. So from now on, I think you should use this machine, this remote desktop session, to configure all your labs. So how do we administer another machine from this one? Well, first off, we need a web browser that is working with the Lab Cloud. And I would prefer that you use Chrome. So it's not installed. So we need to install that one. You can probably use Edge if you want, but in my experience, Chrome is the one that works best. Now it seems to be installed. So we can close this. Then we can go to the lab cloud and log in again. Uh, I need my credentials, so I will go to CoursePress and get them. And if you don't see your information here, you're not logged in, so we have to do that. And then we can open up this, and you should download your key pair to this machine. And this you will use when you're connecting to Linux machines. So we can copy this password and log in. Now, how do we access other machines from this one? Well, when we are talking about the Windows machines, you do the same as we have done for this one. You will have to set up the password as we did for the server. And I think that remote desktop is enabled by default. So since we now are in the LAN, we can access machines within the LAN. So you should be able to use remote desktop from this machine, not your local machine, but from when you're in this admin client. Yeah, and then we need the administrator, what's the account, and your password that you choose. I choose password 12345 dot. Since this machine is not accessible from the outside of the network, you have to be inside it. You don't have to be that strict with the password, but you should use a good password. And now I'm connected to this machine on the local network. So I can administer that machine much better than with the web browser console. And you see up here, you see which machines you are connected to. You can minimize it, and then you're back to your admin client. But how do we access the Linux machines? Well, then in Linux servers, we use the terminal all the time. We don't use any graphical interface. And then we usually use a protocol called SSH. And by default, Windows doesn't have any SSH client, but there are a good one called PuTTY. That you should download to this machine. Let's see, so that we come to the correct page. Yes. And then we will download the stable version. I think here we get all the files, so we can use this MSI file and install that on this admin machine. So you shouldn't install this on your local machine. So now we have putty, and to be able to, since we don't have a password, we need to use this key file, and we downloaded that from before from the lab cloud page, from the course homepage. I downloaded these files, so that should be in the download folder. If we just have this folder called downloads, and then we need to extract them because we have two files in this one. So we extracted all of them. We can have a bit easier name for the folder, just keys. And here you see that we have two. One is called demo, this is your username, key putty, and then for SSH. So if you're not using putty, if you want to use a Linux machines as an admin machine, then you use this key file. It's the same, but they are in different formats. So this is for putty. And in the putty client, you will have to point out where the key files are. So in this menu here, you go down to SSH authentication, and then specify the private key which will be used for authentication. And that is in the downloads key, like that. Then we go back to the session and enter the IP address for the machine. And what is the IP ID? We'll have that here. Here we have the Linux or the Ubuntu machine, and this is the IP address of that machine. And that's all you need. It will download the fingerprint of the server. Yes, we will allow that. And then for the Ubuntu machine, the username is Ubuntu. And since we now have a key file that we specified, the private key, it will authenticate, as we see here, with the public key that we have. So this machine already has that. So now we are logged in to that machine and can administer it from here and run all the commands. So we can try and contact another machine. We could contact the Windows machine. We can try to ping it. And as you see, they are now connected. You can also access the internet, try to ping Google. And here we also see that DNS is working, so we can make can translate the domain name google.com to an IP address, and we get an answer from that. So now we have machines in the LAN that we can administer from this administrator machine. So I'm now logged into this machine, and you probably should have a little bit more RAM on this machine than I choose. I think I choose just 1 gigabyte, and that's a bit small. You should choose a flavor when you create it with at least 2 gigabyte, I think. But you have limited resources. As you see now, I have 3 instances. I used 3 CPUs and some of the RAM that we have. So I think that's it for this demo. Now you are able to set up the basic machines to be able to fulfill the rest of the labs that we are using in this course. We haven't discussed how to access machines in the DMC network, but when that is when we are not using that in the first lab, I will make a video on how to do that, because now if you put a machine in the DMC network, this admin machine won't be able to access it because of the security rules that we have set up now. But that's it for this demo. If you have any problems, you can write questions in the Slack channel. So good luck.